Robert Wadlow was born on February 22, 1918, in the quiet Midwestern town of Alton, Illinois, United States. He was the first of 5 children born to Harold Franklin Wadlow and Addie Johnson Wadlow, a hard-working couple of modest means. His father operated a photography studio in town. His mother was devoted to raising their growing family. By all accounts, Robert's birth was ordinary. He weighed a healthy 8 pounds, 6 ounces, and his parents saw no reason to believe he was anything other than a normal child. But within months, subtle signs began to appear. Changes so gradual that at first they seemed unremarkable. By the time Robert turned 1, his growth had far surpassed that of other children his age. He measured 3 feet, 3 inches tall, the size of a typical 3-year-old. At 5 years old, he already stood 5 feet 4 inches, taller than most of his teachers. Welcome to Shadow Chapters, where history's most extraordinary lives are told with clarity and truth. Subscribe now and join us as we turn the pages of forgotten chapters, uncovering stories that changed the way the world understands itself. Today, we revisit the life of a man who stood quite literally above all others, not as a myth, not as a spectacle, but as a person whose existence challenged medical science and captured the curiosity of an entire generation. This is the story of Robert Pershing Wadlow, the gentle giant who touched the sky. The Wadlow family loved and protected him fiercely. They did not yet understand what caused his unusual size, but they treated him as they would any of their children. He learned to read early, enjoyed building model planes, and developed a quiet fascination with the natural world. At school, Robert quickly became a local curiosity. Teachers would often measure his height in class, noting how fast he grew. He never seemed embarrassed, only mildly amused by the attention. Classmates remembered him as kind and polite, someone who never used his size to intimidate. In 1928, when Robert was 10 years old, he measured 6 feet 5 inches and weighed 200 pounds. His parents took him to see specialists in St. Louis. Doctors ran tests and x-rays, and their conclusions were both fascinating and troubling. They discovered that Robert's pituitary gland, a small organ at the base of the brain responsible for regulating growth hormones, was overactive. Unlike most people, whose glands stop producing growth hormones after adolescence, Robert's continued without pause. The medical term was hyperplasia of the pituitary gland, a rare condition that would cause him to grow for the rest of his life. During the 1920s, medicine was still in its infancy when it came to understanding endocrine disorders. Growth hormones had only recently been identified, and treatments were almost non-existent. For the Wadlows, there were no easy answers. They adapted their home to fit Robert's growing frame. Harold, his father, built custom furniture, a larger bed, an extended desk, and chairs with reinforced legs. His mother sewed his clothing by hand, constantly adjusting hems and sleeves. By the age of 12, Robert's shoes had become a logistical problem of their own. No manufacturer made footwear large enough for his feet, which by then measured 17 inches long. He would eventually wear size 37 AA shoes, the largest ever made. The family had little money, so each pair had to be handmade by local cobblers at great expense. This detail, more than anything, reflected the quiet strain of living with a condition no one could predict or control. By adolescence, Robert's height had made him famous within Illinois. Visitors came from neighboring towns just to glimpse the boy giant. Newspapers printed his photograph, marveling at his growth and publishing updates as if chronicling a natural wonder. Yet, for Robert, the attention was unwanted. He wanted to be treated like everyone else, a desire that followed him his entire life. At 13, he stood 7 feet 4 inches tall. He towered above teachers, family, and even his father, who stood a solid 6 feet. And though he carried this difference with grace, the physical toll had begun. His legs strained under his enormous weight. He began using leg braces to support his knees and ankles, which weakened under the pressure of his continuous growth. Despite this, Robert continued to walk unaided and refused to use a cane or wheelchair. He remained optimistic, attending Alton High School, where he joined clubs, played the tuba in the band, and took a keen interest in photography. His teachers admired his intelligence and determination. Though slow in movement, Robert was quick of mind and had a sharp memory for details. By the late 1920s, the Great Depression loomed over America. Families across the country faced hardship, and the Wadlows were no exception. Still, they maintained dignity and composure, never exploiting Robert's condition for profit. Local reporters occasionally offered to pay for interviews or public appearances. The family declined, wishing to protect Robert from being treated as a curiosity, but as his growth continued unchecked, the situation became impossible to ignore. Medical institutions expressed interest. Photographers and newsreel companies wrote letters requesting footage. And across America, whispers began spreading about the boy from Alton, the one who might become the tallest person who ever lived. By 1931, at the age of 13, Robert Wadlow's height had reached 7 feet 4 inches. Doctors who had once been skeptical now traveled hundreds of miles to observe him. Endocrinologists, anthropologists, and journalists all converged on Alton, each drawn by the mystery of the growing giant. Through it all, Robert remained patient, humble, and respectful. He rarely complained, though every year his size brought new challenges: clothing, shoes, school desks, even doorways. His parents began to accept that his life would never be ordinary. Still, they emphasized education, good manners, and kindness. Robert never let fame inflate his ego. In later years, he would say, "I've never had any desire to be anything more than just a regular fellow." In the early 1930s, America was changing. Science was advancing, but social understanding lagged behind. Disabilities and medical anomalies were often treated as entertainment. Men and women with unusual physical traits were displayed in traveling shows and circuses under cruel names like freaks and oddities. The Wadlows were determined that Robert would never be part of that world. They guarded his dignity fiercely. But as his condition continued, his story was inevitably pulled into the public eye. Robert's adolescence was now behind him, and his physical development showed no sign of slowing. What began as a biological curiosity was fast becoming a global phenomenon. By 1932, Robert Wadlow was entering his mid-teens. At an age when most boys were still finding their place in the world, he already stood 7 feet 10 inches tall and weighed nearly 350 pounds. His hands measured over a foot long. His arms and legs seemed almost disproportionate to the rest of his body. Yet he remained surprisingly coordinated for someone of his immense stature. The people of Alton were proud of him. He had become the town's most recognizable figure, though he carried his fame quietly. He attended high school like any other teenager, though special accommodations were needed: a reinforced desk, enlarged uniforms, and custom shoes. Robert's classmates often described him as reserved but approachable, polite to everyone, and quick to smile. During those years, the Great Depression was at its height. Money was scarce, and the Wadlow family faced growing medical and living expenses. Each new year brought new challenges. Furniture had to be replaced, clothes remade, braces adjusted, and shoes specially ordered. Robert's condition was a paradox, fascinating to the medical community but exhausting to those who lived with it daily. His parents never sought fame or financial gain from his height, but by the time he turned 16, the attention surrounding their son became impossible to contain. Local and national newspapers printed his story again. The headlines were often sensational. "The giant boy of Illinois still growing." Reporters described him in detail, measuring his hands, his shoe size, even the span of his arms. Each article seemed to magnify the distance between Robert and the ordinary world. For the scientific community, Robert represented a living mystery. Endocrinologists had long sought to understand gigantism, but living cases of extreme growth were rare. Robert's condition, pituitary hyperplasia rather than a tumor, made him even more unusual. He was not deformed or misshapen as some giants of the past had been. Rather, he appeared proportionate, simply on an enormous scale. Doctors continued to examine him with his family's consent. There was no known cure. Surgical intervention was deemed too dangerous, and hormone therapy did not yet exist. The medical consensus was that Robert would continue to grow until his body could no longer sustain itself. Such predictions might have frightened most people. But Robert remained remarkably composed. He often remarked that he simply lived each day as it came, without concern for what the future held. He believed his life, no matter how brief, could have purpose. At Alton High School, Robert's presence was both a marvel and a constant logistical challenge. He sat in the front row so he could stretch his long legs into the aisle. His friends helped him navigate crowded hallways where door frames barely cleared his head. The school community treated him with warmth and respect. Photographs from this time show him towering above classmates, his expression calm, thoughtful, sometimes even shy. Though much of his day was spent adjusting to physical discomfort, he refused to complain. He graduated in 1936, earning solid grades and the admiration of teachers who often said his patience and humility outshone his size. When Robert reached his 18th birthday, he measured 8 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 390 pounds. He was by then officially recognized as the tallest man in the world. That same year, his story began to draw attention far beyond Illinois. He enrolled at Shirtleff College, a small institution in Alton affiliated with the Baptist Church. There he studied law with the ambition of becoming an attorney. His professors later recalled that he approached his studies with the same quiet determination he brought to everything else. But the physical difficulties were intensifying. His circulation was poor, and the weight on his legs created constant pain. To walk, he now required steel leg braces, specially crafted to bear his frame. Even then, every step was slow and deliberate. He would never again walk freely or without assistance, yet his spirit remained unbroken. The 1930s were an era of fascination with the extremes of human capability. As technology advanced and the world became more connected, people found themselves captivated by records. The fastest, the strongest, the tallest. Robert Wadlow, though reserved and private, became part of that global curiosity. Requests for interviews, photographs, and appearances poured in. For years, the Wadlow family declined such offers, refusing to let Robert be treated as a sideshow. But by 1936, as his education costs mounted and his medical needs increased, the family faced a difficult decision. That summer, the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus approached Robert with a proposal to join their promotional tour as a featured guest. It was not to be a performance, but rather a public appearance, fully clothed, dignified, and respectful. After careful consideration, Robert agreed. He appeared with the circus for a limited time, dressed in a tailored suit and tie. He did not perform tricks or stunts. He simply stood on stage, greeted spectators, and allowed them to see, perhaps for the first time, a man who defied biology, yet retained his humanity. Contrary to rumor, Robert never enjoyed the spotlight. He saw the tour as an opportunity to help his family financially, not as a career. The public, however, was entranced. Newspapers described him as the gentle giant, a term that followed him for the rest of his life. After his brief work with Ringling Brothers, Robert sought other, more suitable opportunities. In 1938, the International Shoe Company of St. Louis, Missouri contacted him. They offered to provide custom-made shoes at no cost for life, and in exchange, he would serve as a goodwill ambassador, traveling to promote their craftsmanship. This arrangement suited him. It was dignified and gave him the means to travel comfortably, supported by a small team that ensured his medical needs were met. He would later remark that these tours allowed him to meet people across the country and to represent his hometown with pride. During these years, Robert's personality shone most clearly. Accounts from those who met him describe a man of gentle humor and modesty. He shook hands carefully so as not to hurt others with his immense strength. He bowed slightly when greeting children, mindful of the distance his height created. He avoided arrogance and never sought pity. He understood that his presence inspired awe, but he wanted it also to inspire understanding. In interviews, he often spoke softly about his family, his studies, and his belief that one's height or appearance did not define one's worth. These statements, simple as they were, endeared him to the public. Robert's fame spread rapidly during 1936 and 1937. He appeared at state fairs, civic events, and promotional gatherings across the Midwest. Crowds followed him everywhere he went, eager for a glimpse of the tallest man alive. He endured these travels with patience and grace. Photographers captured images of him beside ordinary men and women, dwarfed by comparison. He towered over cars, doorways, and even flagpoles. Yet the expression on his face remained calm, as though he were quietly detached from the spectacle unfolding around him. Robert's growth had not yet stopped. By 1937, at the age of 19, he measured 8 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 435 pounds. Doctors continued to monitor his condition, warning that his heart and joints were under tremendous strain. There was no medical solution available. He often felt fatigued, and his mobility declined steadily. The braces that supported him were heavy, and he had lost most of the feeling in his legs. Despite this, he refused to give up his travels or to live in isolation. Each public appearance became a test of endurance. After long hours of standing and shaking hands, his legs would swell painfully, and his back would ache. Still, he insisted on maintaining his commitments, often saying that he did not wish to disappoint those who came to see him. In photographs from the late 1930s, Robert stands taller and thinner, his frame stretched almost beyond comprehension. And yet, his posture remains upright, his eyes steady. He appeared to embody both the wonder and the fragility of human life. Though admired, he was also profoundly alone. There were no others like him, no one who could fully relate to his experience. But rather than retreat inward, Robert continued to meet the world with grace. His family, friends, and doctors later said that he rarely expressed fear or bitterness. By the end of 1937, Robert Wadlow had become one of the most photographed individuals in America. He was invited to radio programs, featured in magazines, and spoken of across the world. And yet, even as his fame reached its peak, his health began to waver. The story that had captured so much fascination was moving steadily toward its tragic conclusion. By 1938, Robert Wadlow was known across the United States. Everywhere he traveled, people came to see him, not as a curiosity, but as a living marvel of human nature. Newspapers printed his schedule, and crowds lined the streets when he arrived in town. For the International Shoe Company, his goodwill tour was both a success and a testament to their respect for him. He was never advertised as a freak or an exhibit. The company made sure he was introduced as Mr. Robert Wadlow of Alton, Illinois, the world's tallest man. In every appearance, he wore a custom 3-piece suit, a tie, and carefully fitted shoes, each size 37 AA, measuring over 18 inches long. He traveled with a companion and a driver, his father occasionally joining the longer tours. They crossed the Midwest and parts of the East Coast, appearing at shoe stores, community halls, and fairs. Wherever he went, he greeted people warmly, signing autographs with long, graceful hands. The late 1930s were a time of optimism for Robert. Though physically fragile, he had found a balance between his limitations and his ambitions. He enjoyed meeting new people and seeing new places: Detroit, St. Louis, Cleveland, Chicago, and small towns scattered across the Midwest. In one interview from 1938, he was asked what he hoped to do after his tour ended. He replied simply, I'd like to continue with my education. I've always been interested in law. It was a modest answer from a man who had every reason to see himself as extraordinary. But beneath the calm surface, his health was deteriorating. His immense frame put tremendous strain on his circulatory and nervous systems. He lacked normal sensation in his feet and lower legs, which meant he could not feel pain or pressure properly. This condition made injuries particularly dangerous. The steel braces he wore to support his legs sometimes caused friction or sores. Because he could not feel them, small wounds often went unnoticed until infection set in. In an age before antibiotics were widely available, such infections could be fatal. Despite these risks, Robert refused to stop traveling. He often said that as long as people wanted to meet him, he would continue to go. He saw his appearances not as self-promotion, but as service, an opportunity to show dignity and kindness in the face of adversity. In 1939, he reached his greatest recorded height, 8 feet 11 inches. He weighed 491 pounds and still showed no signs of his growth slowing down. Doctors speculated that he might surpass 9 feet before his body could no longer endure the strain. At that height, even simple movements required effort. Robert's walking cane was nearly 5 feet tall. His braces alone weighed over 20 pounds. He slept in a specially made bed measuring nearly 9 feet long. Every object in his life, clothing, furniture, instruments of daily use, had to be custom-built. Yet in all accounts he remained cheerful and grateful. He wrote letters to friends, sent postcards from the road, and never once used his condition as an excuse for complaint. Those who knew him personally often said his greatest quality was not his size, but his gentle manner and genuine humility. During the spring of 1940, Robert began a new leg of his goodwill tour across Michigan. He was then 22 years old, still growing, and traveling more than 20,000 miles a year. By now, he was one of the most recognized figures in the nation. In early July, he arrived in Manistee, Michigan, to appear at a local festival. He had been in good spirits, smiling for photographs and shaking hands with hundreds of visitors, but he had recently been fitted with a new brace on his right leg. Unbeknownst to him, the metal rubbed against his ankle, causing a blister to form beneath the fabric. Because Robert had almost no feeling in his lower limbs, he did not notice the injury. Within hours, the wound became infected. At first, he dismissed it as minor and continued his engagements. But by the time he returned to his hotel, he was feverish and weak. Doctors were called immediately. They discovered a severe bacterial infection and administered emergency treatment. Robert was confined to bed, and his condition quickly worsened. The infection had entered his bloodstream, a form of septicemia. Despite the best efforts of his physicians, there was little that could be done. Penicillin, which might have saved his life, had not yet become widely available to the public. Over the next several days, his fever climbed steadily. His father remained at his bedside, and local doctors worked tirelessly to ease his suffering. He drifted in and out of consciousness, speaking only occasionally. On July 15, 1940, at 1:30 a.m., Robert Wadlow, the tallest man in recorded history, passed away in his sleep. He was just 22 years old. News of his death spread across the nation by morning. Newspapers in every state carried the story on their front pages. For millions, it was as if a living monument had fallen. His passing marked the end of an era, a reminder of both the wonder and the vulnerability of human life. The people of Alton, Illinois, mourned deeply. Robert's body was returned home, accompanied by his father and a small group from the International Shoe Company. The town prepared for his funeral with solemn care. On July 19, 1940, thousands gathered to pay their respects. The ceremony was held at the First United Methodist Church of Alton, where Robert had once attended services as a boy. The coffin, specially built, measured over 10 feet long and weighed nearly 1,000 pounds. It required 12 pallbearers to carry it. The funeral was quiet, dignified, and deeply emotional. Friends and neighbors spoke of Robert's kindness, his patience, and his unwavering good nature. His family chose not to focus on his size, but on his humanity. He was buried in Oakwood Cemetery, under a solid concrete vault, not out of spectacle, but to protect the grave from disturbance. To this day, visitors still come to Alton to see his resting place and the memorial statue that stands nearby. Robert's parents received thousands of letters from around the world, messages of sympathy, admiration, and gratitude. Many wrote that he had reminded them of the quiet strength that could exist within physical difference. After his death, medical experts confirmed that Robert's growth had not yet ended at the time of his passing. It was likely he would have surpassed 9 feet within a year, but his legacy extended far beyond his height. For endocrinologists, his case provided invaluable insight into the workings of the pituitary gland and human growth. For historians, his life reflected a changing era, one in which science, media, and curiosity often blurred the boundaries between admiration and exploitation. Yet Robert himself remained untouched by cynicism. In a world that often sought to make him an attraction, he chose to remain a person of dignity and restraint. He never sought to astonish, only to live as well as he could. That quiet grace became the most enduring part of his story. In the decades since, Robert Wadlow has remained a figure of fascination and respect. His image appears in museums, textbooks, and documentaries. The Guinness World Records continues to recognize him as the tallest man in recorded history, 8 feet 11.1 inches. But for the people of Alton, he is remembered not as a record, but as a neighbor, a son, and a friend. Each July, the community still celebrates Robert Wadlow Day, honoring the legacy of a man who faced unimaginable challenges with calm and kindness. At the site of his statue, standing tall against the Midwestern sky, visitors often remark that despite its size, the sculpture seems gentle, peaceful, almost humble. It captures the spirit of the man himself, immense, but never imposing. Robert Wadlow's story endures because it is more than the account of an extraordinary body. It is a reflection on human perseverance, on grace under strain, and on the will to live with dignity no matter the odds. He showed the world that greatness is not measured in inches or feet, but in humility, character, and courage. In the decades that followed Robert Wadlow's death, his story remained one of the most remarkable chapters in medical and human history. Doctors, historians, and the general public alike continued to ask the same question: how could one human being grow to such a height? His case became a cornerstone in the study of endocrinology, the branch of medicine dealing with hormones and growth. When researchers examined his medical records, they confirmed what earlier physicians had suspected. Robert suffered from pituitary gland hyperplasia, a rare overproduction of growth hormone caused by enlargement of the gland rather than a tumor. Unlike acromegaly, which distorts features and causes abnormal bone thickness, Robert's growth remained proportionate. That detail fascinated scientists. It suggested that his body was obeying its own natural pattern, only amplified beyond normal limits. The medical insights drawn from his case helped pave the way for future research into hormone regulation and treatment for gigantism. Decades later, synthetic hormone therapy would become standard care for similar conditions, a development that, tragically, came too late to help Robert himself. But Robert's influence reached far beyond medicine. In American culture, he became a figure who bridged science and humanity, a reminder of both nature's extremes and the quiet dignity of those who bear them. During the early 20th century, public fascination with physical difference was often cruel or sensationalized. Yet Robert's image challenged that tone. He was not a sideshow or a novelty. He was a man, intelligent, courteous, and grounded in faith and family. Photographs from his tours continue to circulate today. In them, we see not a spectacle, but a calm young man who met the world's gaze with composure. His calm defied ridicule, transforming curiosity into admiration. He redefined what it meant to be different in an era that often feared difference. In doing so, he became a subtle advocate for dignity and respect, not through speeches, but through example. The city of Alton, Illinois, never forgot its tallest son. In 1985, more than 40 years after his passing, the Alton Museum of History and Art established a permanent exhibit dedicated to his life. The exhibit included personal belongings, photographs, and replicas of his clothing and braces. 4 years later, in 1989, a life-sized bronze statue of Robert was erected beside the Southern Illinois University Dental School in Alton. The statue, sculpted with striking realism, stands exactly 8 feet 11 inches tall, depicting him in casual posture, hand extended, a faint smile on his face. Visitors from around the world come to see it each year. Many pose beside it, astonished by the sheer scale. But most leave reflecting on something deeper, the serenity and gentleness that the sculpture conveys. It is a memorial not to a record, but to a man who bore the burden of fame with grace. In the decades since, Robert's name has appeared in hundreds of books, documentaries, and scientific papers. The Guinness World Records Organization, established in the 1950s, has never found another verified case that surpasses his height. To this day, he remains the tallest man in recorded history. Yet in the town where he was born, the numbers matter less than the memories. Former classmates spoke of him for decades afterward, of how he always offered to carry heavy books for others, even when walking caused him pain, of how he insisted on attending public school rather than private tutoring because he wanted to live as normally as possible. These stories have been passed down through generations, shaping the way Alton tells its history, not with pity, but with pride. Robert Wadlow's story also endures as a moral lesson, a reflection on humility in an age of spectacle. The world around him was fascinated by scale, skyscrapers rising in cities, airplanes conquering the skies, athletes breaking records. Amid that fascination, Robert stood as a literal giant, yet he embodied humility. He sought no power, no wealth, no exploitation of his difference. His greatest wish, recorded in one of his final interviews, was to live a simple life and be treated like anyone else. In a time when the extraordinary was often commercialized, that wish carried quiet wisdom. It reminded the public that humanity, not height, defines greatness. From a historical perspective, Robert's life marks a transitional point between old forms of spectacle and the rise of modern compassion in science. Earlier generations had treated those with rare conditions as curiosities, but Robert's case helped change that conversation. Doctors and journalists alike began to speak of him with respect. Articles referred to him not as the giant, but as Mr. Wadlow. That shift in language reflected something larger, a growing awareness that medical conditions, however extraordinary, did not diminish human dignity. His quiet example played a role, however small, in that transformation. Over time, myths and exaggerations have surrounded his story, as they often do with remarkable figures. Yet the facts remain clear, supported by medical documentation and eyewitness accounts. Robert Pershing Wadlow was born in 1918, grew continuously throughout his life, and died in 1940 at the age of 22, measuring 8 feet 11.1 inches in height and 491 pounds in weight. He possessed an unusually calm temperament, a polite manner, and a strong sense of duty to his family and community. He did not seek attention, but he accepted it with grace. He lived without bitterness, even as his condition made daily life a challenge. He faced constant discomfort, physical strain, and social isolation, yet he endured them all without resentment. That, perhaps, is the most extraordinary part of his story. Today, when people visit Alton and stand beside his statue, they often tilt their heads upward, marveling at his height. But what lingers afterward is not astonishment. It is reverence. Robert Wadlow was, and remains, a symbol of human endurance. A reminder that strength of character often lies in quiet perseverance, not in size or fame. His life story bridges science and the soul, the measurable and the meaningful. And though the man himself is gone, his legacy stands taller than any measurement could record. You've been listening to the story of Robert Wadlow, the gentle giant who touched the sky. A life measured not by height, but by humility. If you found this story inspiring, consider joining us again on Shadow Chapters, where history's forgotten lives and hidden truths are brought to light. Stories of courage, resilience, and quiet strength that shaped our world in ways often overlooked. Subscribe to Shadow Chapters to discover more historical documentaries, each one a window into the human experience, told with accuracy, depth, and respect. Because history is not just what happened, it's what it meant.